what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What is the new precedent that we're setting for the future? And what you're saying is exactly right. This puts us on a path where how can we really be a just nation?
Because it used to be that, even the guise was that the US president was acting on behalf of the country,
Yeah.
not merely just
The party.
the party or themselves or their family.
Right. Even the guy you didn't like. I talk about, I think my dad voted for Kennedy, and that was like the last person he voted for, and yeah, there was this notion. I remember the Reagan years, and it was like, oh, this sucks. And like, oh, they're not helping poor people. Like that was the conversation. It wasn't at the level that it is now when I talk with my kids, where everybody's like screaming at each other and crying and, like over what is happening to this country. Like, what does this government represent?
Well, I mean, when I joined the agency, I think, so I grew up in a very liberal family as well. And we were all, a melting pot and hope and peace and, we're Buddhists. So when I went to law school was the first time I started really broadening my perspective and becoming centered. And when I was at the agency, the same thing happened. I became more and more centered. And when I voted for Obama, I was really excited for President Obama.
We went to
the inauguration, the first inauguration. Yeah. But over the course of his 8 years, there were things he did that I did not agree with. And that was the first time where I was like, I liked this guy, but he is doing stuff that I really disagree with. And every president since then, whether I voted for them or not, has done things that I'm like, okay, let's see how that goes. Or I really kind of think that's a bad idea. So I do think that we have been on a trajectory. Like democracy was always an experiment. They say it in the history books, right? And when they first created our government, the president had like almost no power because the Congress was supposed to take care of it. We are a representative republic. They're supposed to represent us and make the decisions for us. But over time, the president has gained more and more power, which now reflects the governments that South America has, that Latin America has. Strong executives, weak Congress. If that's the direction America wants to go, then
that's inevitable.
Then that's inevitable, right? Then that is the choice that Americans are making today. If this is not the direction we want to go, we need to do something about it as voters, as the public, because Congress, we can see, Congress is not going to change it on its own. We are on this trajectory until the American people step up and say, this is not the America we want.
How would you like me to step up, though? Like, I don't know how many signs I can hold up and how many pussy hats I can wear. I mean, literally, and I think this is like what a lot of people are feeling fatigue about, in particular, people who do align with more liberal values. Like, I mean, many people are leaving the country.
Yeah.
And to me, that also feels like, gosh, I don't know. I mean, for me, this is the place we came to because no one else would take us. Like, that's my family story.
Yes.
So like, I'm American. This is like, I'm a citizen of nowhere and everywhere. Right.
Yeah.
So like, I don't even know what that looks like. I don't know what marching does. My parents did it against Vietnam and, and that was a thing. But it's like, I watch everybody marching. I'm like, we're marching for Instagram. Like, with all due respect, it's like when people show me the marches they went to, it's like, look at my cute costume I wore. And I'm like, what's happening?
So Andy knows that I have a horrible person inside of me. So
a very evil person.
A very evil person
Can we
inside
speak to that person now?
Yes.
See what I'm saying?
So my advice is that you have to play the game. When I first went into college, I was very hopeful. And I thought, I can change things from the inside. I can play the honest game and still win. That is not true. You have to play their game. The reason that the conservative right has gotten so far is that they have spent the last 20 years prepping. They have strategically used court cases to change law. They have strategically invested money into people that hold the values that they want to propagate, right? That's what you have to do. You can't go out there and hold a sign and hope that everybody sees that you're right and we'd all be better off if, we sang Kumbaya together. That's not going to work. You have to invest time and money and have a good strategy to shift hearts and minds and laws.
I would say that there's, to your point about people leaving, there's, by and large, I think there's two ways that we can affect change. One is do what's best for you. And if what's best for you is leaving, I understand that your family's story was one story, but that doesn't mean it's your story, right? You are a standout person in so many ways. You can write a whole different future for yourself and for your kids. The more that we stop holding on to the past and the more that we realize that we're actively writing the future, if we make that a very personal choice, people will notice. The UK is struggling right now because people become millionaires in the UK, and then you know what they do? They leave the UK. So the UK is watching wealthy people leave and go somewhere else. Same thing's happening in the United States right now. Every person I know with a net worth of $5 million or more, if they know me well enough that we have this conversation, they have property, investments, or plans. Maybe they even hold already a second passport or a golden visa to go somewhere else. They're not exclusively American and an American passport with hopes and dreams that are tied to the American economy. They are diversifying their lives, not just their portfolios. And that's important because as the government watches people be incentivized to leave, they're going to do everything they can to try to bring those people back or claw back what they can from those people. Because you're right, that the middle class is being crushed.
Let's game this out a little bit. Because we talk a lot about, we're moving into dictatorship. And I think a lot of people, it doesn't mean anything to them, right? They're like, okay, some of my rights are being taken away, and this is just how government works. And it's always a crisis from this generation to that generation. And this is just the next version of that, right? But what actually happens? Because we're talking about the destabilization of the currency. We're talking about potential uprising, violent uprising. Like, why are people that have $5 million leaving?
Jihi's family's lived through this. Jihi's family is from Venezuela. Like, her father was born in Caracas, like left as a Venezuelan citizen, became an American citizen, because what we are experiencing is almost exactly what happened in Venezuela. And it's not violent. That's the most insidious part of it. It's not violent. It's not abrupt. It's slow, viral kind of infection. So in a nutshell, as the American dollar loses power, it incentivizes other countries to decouple from the American dollar or to diversify into currencies other than the American dollar, whether that's the Japanese yen or whether that's the Chinese renminbi or whether that's you name it, whatever currency they choose to diversify into. And keep in mind, China for a long time wasn't part of the World Bank. Their currency was never part of that basket. It was only in the last 15 or 20 years that they became part of the basket that is, part of the IMF. So that brought them legitimacy, and that's legitimacy there that is increasing for the Chinese currency and legitimacy that is decreasing for the US dollar. So as the US economy reduces its power, whether you count that in GDP or PPP or currency value, whatever, as the United States decreases, other countries are increasing. CIA believes that all people are born with a spy secret superpower. For some people, that means they can win deals. For others, they can spot liars. Some can even seduce lovers. I built a free 3-minute test to help reveal to you exactly what your secret hidden superpower is. All you have to do is click on the link in the description below, take the test, and start using your spy superpower to stay ahead of 99% of people. Whether that's one country like China or whether that's a group of countries like the BRICS nations. So you have a superpower that's decreasing and a rising power that's increasing. What that means is that the parity between the two countries is getting closer and closer, which means other countries are becoming more and more wealthy and successful, while Americans are becoming less and less wealthy and successful. At some point, you're going to reach equality. Equality is the peak of conflict. Equality is the peak of conflict. There's a promise out there that equality is going to make everybody happy. Equality just makes everybody hungrier to get a little bit ahead of their competitor. Right now, no one's trying to compete with the US except for one or two countries, right? What we call global power competitors, GPC countries. When the time comes that the United States is basically at paradox with China, that means Americans have to learn Chinese. It's not an option anymore, right? That's why
We don't like to learn any language except English.
if you look at the languages spoken around the world, only 25% of all the people who speak English are native English speakers. 75% of the people who speak English worldwide learned it as a second or third language because they knew they needed it for success.
That's how we knew we're winning. I mean, that's what people would say.
At a minimum, just imagine that your grandkids might have to learn Chinese, not by choice, not as an elective, but because if they want to have a career as an adult, they have to learn Chinese. That's a scary thought. And that's a very simple thought to understand. If that's what they have to learn to speak, what does that mean about your 401k? What does that mean about your bank account? What does that mean about your small business? What does that mean about policy that's being levied that impacts everything from your healthcare to your job to your minimum wage? Everything changes as the United States declines from its role of global superpower.
Yeah, and so my first professional job was with a nonprofit organization who began by working with Holocaust survivors, and then it expanded its services to work with torture survivors and refugees. And so that exposure made me realize that, just like Andy was saying, it doesn't happen quickly. It's always a slow burn, and there are always signs along the way. I mean, if you look at, from the time that Hitler took power to when things were really obviously bad, it was a couple of years. And there were things happening all along the way that, people either thought, well, it can't get any worse than this, or they were like, well, maybe we'll wait it out a little bit longer because I don't want to uproot my business. And then next thing you know, it's too late. So, you know, for me, and then my family's from Venezuela, and we watched that happen too. And it was a slow burn of everything
Give us a
getting worse
little
and
thumbnail
worse.
for people who haven't followed it or don't know the history.
Yeah, so Venezuela Venezuela used to be, it's
1980s,
70s, 80s.
late 70s, early 80s.
So it's an oil country. They had lots of oil money. It's a beautiful, beautiful country, amazing people, amazing food. But over time, there was a bigger and bigger gap between the wealthy and the poor. And the poor in Venezuela are really, really poor. So over time, because of that gap, eventually Hugo Chavez was brought to power because so many people were suffering. And I think people forget that that people can only suffer and be oppressed for so long before they are going to make a change, either through uprising or voting, and voting, a strong-armed president into power who says, I will take care of it. I will take care of you. I will take care of all of your needs. And that was the promise from Hugo Chavez.
And the country was, people were suffering and almost they were brainwashed. They just needed something to believe in, and they
Yes,
empowered someone to take care of these problems, whether or not he had their best interest in mind or not.
exactly.
And
And so,
The Chavez administration was buying votes in essence,
yeah,
Mhm.
like buying it with promises, buying it with eggs, buying it with milk and bread,
yeah,
because at the
They were
time
cheap.
the country was such that every vote was equal.
Mm.
yeah.
So if you get a vote from a poor, uneducated person who doesn't even understand what they're voting for, or whether you get a vote from an educated elite, doesn't matter. The vote is still a vote.
Right. And so, he's voted on all these promises, and there's this legitimate suffering that's happening, but because the previous administrations never tended to it, now we have somebody who's basically inept at running a country, and everything tanks. He makes everything state owned. He takes the PDVSA, which is the oil company. He kicks out all the foreigners who were doing the oil processing and finding the oil, things like that. All of their other sources of income, he made it state run. Nobody really knew how to do it because it was his cronies, and the whole country tanks. And now
Massive
everybody's poor.
inflation,
Yeah.
their currencies devalued. Anyone who had savings lost everything.
Lost everything.
And millions of people left. Anybody who could leave, it was a complete brain drain. It was a complete money drain. And now everybody who's left there they're all suffering the
And
same.
now decades later, it's not any better.
Right.
And that's the thing that we need to understand, is that so much bad can happen in such a short period of time, but it takes such a long time to build something good and robust.
Mhm.
I don't believe that our country's doomed, but I do believe that, just like you're saying, we are at a place where the conversations that we have around our dinner table, the conversations that we have with our teenage children, are way more mature and radical than we ever had when we were teenagers. And that should be a sign that we have to ask ourselves, what kind of conversations do we want our children having with their teenagers? And what can we do now to shape those conversations then?
I think what you're talking about in terms of strategy and going after, in a legislative way, impact and how to have impact is important. But what are some of the signs that you're looking at that are happening in the US, not to, again, fearmonger, but to sort of parallel and understand where we are? For example, the privatization, is that equivalent to having impact where our allies are no longer allies and we're treating them in a way economically that is pushing them away? Like, what are the things that you're seeing currently in the US that are causes or red flags?
For me, it's a large part of it is the currency, what's happening to the US dollar, the fact that the currency isn't stable, and the fact that other countries are learning how to make their currency more attractive by kind of turning to a more pragmatic term of agreement rather than an ideological term of agreement. What I mean by that is the United States for a long time since World War II has basically said, if you want to do business with us, you have to believe in democracy and you have to fit these certain rules. We even have rules about like anti-corruption and non-corruption acts where we won't do business with corrupt officials in foreign countries. Well, we say we won't, right? Where
Sorry,
other
it's
countries,
funny.
yeah, other countries don't put those stipulations in place. Business is business. It's transactional. It's pragmatic. It's not ideological. So when I watch our currency decline, that's a big part of what frustrates me. The other thing that is a sign for me is when we see education be something that is driven by policy.
The research, the attack on research, even if you don't like the DEI, which I can understand, look, there's a lot there that we're not going to tackle, but the attack on research and the brain drain that comes from restricting the brightest people in the world who once saw the US as a beacon from coming here is a serious concern.
When you attack universities, when you start to use funding, and when you start to use banking and funding as penalties, when we seized Russian assets as an example, in support of Ukraine, you can't do that. If you seize someone else's money because they put their money in your bank in good faith, and then you seize their money because you disagree with them, all that does is tell everybody else out there,
don't put your money there.
Don't put your money in that bank, because if they disagree with you, they're going to take your money. And that's exactly what China did. They pulled their money out of American banks, decreasing the power of the American dollar. But you're exactly right. These are signs for me, because it's not something that affects us today. It's something that affects us for the next 5 years, 12 years, 18 years or more. When you attack liberal institutions, when you attack schools of thought, when you reduce research, when you use funding as a penalty or as a reward. I mean, I wasn't happy even when we were like in our 20s or in high school, and they started talking about whether or not you can say one nation under God. I didn't understand why that was a thing. And now I realize that calling into question education at all has incredible long-term impact.
Yeah, for me too, the watching the educational institutions be attacked and then watching them acquiesce to the demands is very concerning for me. I keep my eye more on civil rights issues. So as rights begin to be taken away, and it's not necessarily as they begin to be taken away, but it's as they are taken away and nobody says anything.
I think there are many signs that we should all be paying attention to, and there's personal signs too. And every one of us is seeing signs in our personal lives that show us the trajectory that we're on is unnerving. At the very least, it's not confident. We don't know where it's going. It could go up, it could go down, and nobody likes to gamble for real. And that's essentially what we all have to do right now, is either gamble or stand up. And one of the ways that we've always talked about, like standing up, that doesn't involve a sign or an Instagram selfie, like you said. One of the ways that we've always talked about really stepping up is voting for that third party. What happens when we have a record-breaking voter turnout and a record-breaking amount of voters for a third party?
Yeah.
It still means that one of the other two parties is going to win. But right now, everybody goes to the polls thinking, I don't want to waste my vote. So they vote not for who they want, but for their second or third choice.
Well, and I think that's a good point, also is that if we talk about sort of removing a partisan voice from our universities, right, from liberal institutions, we don't want to live in a country where kind of like the loudest, wealthiest voice wins. And I think that's sort of the danger. And if the president, let's say, is not the party that you like, you're not going to like anything they do, right? Unless they're doing something that personally serves you. And that's also not the way we sort of make decisions, And I think that's complicated. I think the university example is a great one where civil rights has to be a foundational bottom line of us as citizens of this country. And that's always true. And there always has to be a conversation about what is a defense of free speech? How do we protect people's rights while also not making it partisan argument of my side's going to win, and so your side has to pay. And I think that's also, what a lot of people don't understand and are still trying to negotiate around what we believe,
Back to the leaving America part. If one chooses to leave America, there's only a certain number of places that they may want to go if they want to continue to be in one of the superpower options, right? You can think that China's on the rise. Maybe they want to go there. If you're thinking about your economic stability and you're concerned about your investments in the US declining, then you would want to place them into a rising competitor, right? So then the options are the EU. And is the EU really better off than the US? Like trying, because I think people hear this and they're like, it's hyperbolic, right? For some, it's like, well, can I really root my life? Many people can't. The people who can. So like, I'm curious, because I had this conversation, my father's in finance, and we sort of do this, our dinner table speculation is, how is the world going to collapse? And if so, what do you do about it, right? And his perspective is that every country besides Germany has a massive amount of debt. The US's debt, especially with the big beautiful bill, is skyrocketing. Our mutual friend Tom Bilyeu is like, this is going to guarantee that the US is going to go bankrupt. And in that becomes this increasing divide between the rich and the poor. And when the poor are poor enough, then massive civil unrest happens and no one is safe. You can't have a huge economic divide. It's just not possible. You need a functional and thriving middle class for an economy and a society to be safe and to be healthy. So is Europe better off in that regard if everyone is in debt? Or is it like, because there's so much turmoil, some people will say, well, there's just this turmoil and there's no real path through it. I'm curious.
Well, I would say that your foundational argument is flawed.
Okay.
Because it's not necessarily about going to another competitor. Think of it like if you're a superstar athlete, you don't just go to your rival. You don't especially go to your rival right away, because to do that creates all sorts of secondary and tertiary issues that become difficult, right? What's your contract rate going to be? How are people going to view you? What's your fan base opinion, et cetera, et cetera. So you don't go to a superpower. So you're not going to leave the United States to go to China. Please, whatever camera is looking at me, which camera is looking at me? That camera's, do not leave the United States to go to China. If there's anything that we should have learned in the last 6 months or so, it's that China has zero problem detaining you just because you're an American. You're not going to thrive in China. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do business with Chinese businesses from a safe place like Switzerland, but you don't go to fucking China. You don't leave the United States to go to a competitor. You leave to go to a more stable, there's no place better. No place is better than any other place, but you can find a place that's going to be more stable, say, for the next 10 or 15 years. While the United States will be unstable for the next 10 or 15 years. You can go to Portugal, you can go to Costa Rica, you can go to Switzerland, you can go to Croatia, you can go to any number of these places where they're not better than the United States, but the stability for the next 10 or 15 years will look differently. And then one of the beautiful things about being American is that we still have a strong passport. We still have a strong currency for now. That could change. Well, conveniently, it takes about 10 years to change your citizenship. So you could go to another country, not to give up your American citizenship, but to gain a second citizenship.
Just to keep options open.
Just to keep options open. And guess who gets to keep whatever second citizenship you gain? Your children. So you're literally giving your children additional options, right? And that's how professionals in the intelligence world see it. It's not a matter of finding what's better right now. It's a matter of what can I do now to give me more options in an uncertain future.
Croatia?
I've heard nice things.
I mean, I've been there. I actually went on a USO tour. I did a USO tour several years ago, so I got to see army bases all over the world, which was really amazing. Croatia is beautiful.
Portugal's nice.
I was not on an army base in Portugal. I was in Djibouti.
Not so nice.
I was in the Middle East. It was,
Beautiful or not beautiful is not really what I'm talking about.
Well, some people think like Croatia, and it's like, what's that like? But there are also like picturesque, enjoyable,
for sure,
beautiful things. It's
not, on the cusp of
like a lot of people hear like that, and they think like war, and
absolutely.
it's
Oh yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair. But it's on the verge of becoming a member of the EU on using the euro. Like it's on the rise in a lot of ways. It's a place where not just Americans, but successful people, digital nomads from all over the world, are kind of flocking in that direction because of the low cost of living, of the stability, especially stability for being a foreigner in Croatia, which, never forget, when you're an American and you leave the United States, you're not a local in that country. You are a foreigner in that country. In the United States, we don't treat foreigners very well. In other countries, it's the opposite. A lot of countries treat foreigners very, very well because they see foreigners as an injection point for a foreign currency into their economy. Whereas here, we just see foreigners as people who speak funny.